I worked for probably about 15 years in human rights and civil rights work, primarily in the field of gender violence and rape and warfare and crimes against humanity that are targeted towards gender and towards women. And over the years, I started taking many oral histories of women in conflict zones all around the world and in the United States. And as I began to work with a few very elderly Holocaust survivors, they had one story that was the official story that they would tell and had told for their lives. And then there was a second story that was after the cameras turned off and after the microphones were away and after people stopped taking notes. It was a sexual abuse story, and it was a story of endemic rape and a form of power and control and terror targeted towards women, specifically by the Nazis in the concentration camps and elsewhere. And I think what struck me the most was realizing that in the most documented and the most discussed contemporary genocide, the 20th century genocide of which we know the most, that even in that context, these institutional power structures that abuse women are still undiscussed. So I began the work because part of what they said to me was, we are sitting here at 80 years old, 85 years old, and horrified to see that in the newspapers today, the same things that we experienced are still happening to women everywhere, and nothing has changed. The motto around the Shoah is never again, and they say every day. What happens to never again when for half of humanity it's every 30 seconds? And that resonated with me very powerfully. When I arrived, I was at the site in the camp where the building had been and is no longer standing. And as I stood there and took up space, I think people started to come up and talk to me because some people knew what had happened in that building. And they said, you know, there was this rumor that these women had been prisoners had been shipped down in a transport from Ravensbrück and separated, and some of the women were sent to the rape brothel, and the other women and girls were sent to the Agfa camera sub-camp of the factory. So they were making cameras. And I hadn't known that when I arrived, and so it was suddenly this image in my mind of these two groups of women saying goodbye to each other, going to different fates, and one group making objects that would document their own destruction. I mean, they were cameras that were specifically meant for the Wehrmacht, that were meant for soldiers to document this new cleansed world where there were no more imperfect people, there were no more of these women, and they would be sitting there every day making these cameras. So I talked to a few people who, in Munich, who took me through all the camera stores and junk shops and finding these cameras that the women had made. Those cameras were equipped to take film, color film, and there exists color film from World War II era, from the Holocaust. We don't see it very often, but it was there. And so that also went, when I started going back and working with these cameras and all of their aberrations and realizing these women were flesh and blood. These women, they saw blue sky. If they, you know, all of the pictures are photographed from what their visual point of view would have been. So I stood on the edges of where the building, looking out at where from photographs the windows had been. So if there's a view of a wall, it's the view that would have been of the wall. If there's a view of the grass, it would have been a view of the grass, and the sky and the storms coming across. The colors that in doing a project that was attempting to pay homage to what they had seen, that's part of what they would have seen, is that that color. And that has been, I think, the angularity. To me, there's a responsibility in the third generation to continue to make work that remains relevant to new generations and continues to move our conversation forward and continues to reflect the changes that are happening over time, because the Holocaust cannot become stuck in something that feels so far away. For definitely, there's no way that, I think as an American coming to Bavaria, as an American Jew, there's this almost a pilgrimage decision that many of us have to make. Will we go back? Will we not? Will we try to connect to a past that our families have very complicated relationships to? As a rape survivor, how was I going to do this? As a woman, how was I, these levels of personal implication, I think, has become very important. It was an uncomfortable project for me to make. I wanted it to be an uncomfortable project for, I think, for everyone. For the conversation over time about, particularly sometimes in the United States, where we have a very strong educational culture around the Holocaust, and there are conversations that happen, and sometimes I've felt like, as this woman says, oh, I talk about the Holocaust to school groups every week, but I've never said this. And there's an eagerness, I think, on my part to disrupt what we think we know, who we think we are. I came into this project thinking of myself as this, impartial, human rights trained professional, and became more and more and more emotionally drawn in and psychologically drawn in, and I think that's the only way that's what artwork is supposed to do, but it's a dangerous and painful thing to have to experience yourself or to feel like you're putting your audience through, Yeah, and we're calling attention to the phenomenon of time, and so it's visible, so that people stop and actually think about how time is just compressed. I think, particularly, I'm very interested in third generation. From whatever role a family ancestry had during World War II or during the Holocaust, you as a third generation person, I think you have a very unique, distinctive relationship to time, relationship to family. There are most of us whose grandparents told us things that they did not tell our parents, and then you have these arguments in a family about this never happened. Well, it was a deathbed confession. They told the third generation. We have our own relationship to family time and to the time of the Holocaust that I think doesn't stop. I think this idea that you could hit 1945 or you could hit 1947 or things could, you could immigrate to the United States, for instance, and start a new life and things would stop. We're the living proof that it's haunting us deeply. And the number of Germans that I spoke with who are very haunted by the continuing repercussions of what their grandparents did. You can't control what happened in that time. You can't actually reach back and save an ancestor or change an ancestor's mind or make them not do or do what they did or didn't do. But the effects are still sitting on your shoulders. They're still, and I think it changes very much how you look at those artifacts. If you look at that black and white photograph and you see a face that looks like yours, but it's not yours and it's not your parents, it's someone who you never even got to know. This relationship to layers of time that I think there's an ache, for me, there's an ache to reach through and either help or connect or know what's been lost, and it's not possible. So to me, a lot of these pieces are very much about a loneliness, about being lost in time, because there are these clouds that will always, that's why things are out of focus. Like, it's never going to be fully in focus. I'm never going to really see. I'm never going to really touch. There's nothing I can ever really do. And that's a very unique, it's a shared, there are many people besides me who have that feeling, but it's a very profound, distinct feeling of lostness.